Hey everybody, this is Bjorn Bjorholm of Eisei-en Bonsai Nursery. You're listening to the Bonsai Time podcast. I'm coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee at the moment, soon to be Kyoto, Japan. So enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Bonsai Time Podcast, the tree hugger's #1 spot for history, horticulture, and having fun. In this episode, we have an exclusive interview with Bjorn Bjorholm of Eisei-en Bonsai Kyoto, formerly known as Eisei-en. In this interview, we talk with Bjorn about his most recent shift in his professional bonsai career, his move to Japan, and all the things that go into moving and finding and starting a new life in Japan. Have a listen, and always remember, bonsai on! Bjorn, thank you for joining us and taking time in your busy schedule. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
It's probably been a whirlwind of all events, emotions, and everything for you going through, right?
Yeah, most definitely. I just finished styling the last tree that I will style at Eisei-en late last night. The owner
Oh,
of the tree is
wow.
actually coming up to pick it up today. So uh, it was kind of a last minute request from a good friend of mine to style this tree. So I wanted to get it in before we finished everything up. And then this Saturday, I head out, start driving to LA. I'm driving my dog over that way, and then we're going to fly from LA to Japan directly.
Are you taking your dog with you?
Yep, she's coming with us. So she's
Uh,
a big German Shepherd, so it's too hard to get her onto like a domestic flight from Nashville direct to LA. We'd
Mhm.
have to change 2 or 3 times because of the size of the airplane that's required.
Right.
So just for safety's sake, I figured it's just easier if I just drive her straight to LA myself, and then we just take one flight from there.
Makes
Get her
sense.
get her prepped for the long journey too, right?
Yep, she's out at the
Mhm.
groomers right now, getting all primed and ready to go.
How
Yeah,
much
and
how to say how much paperwork's involved with that now? I know it was a lot before.
It's a lot, yeah. So you have to start the process about 6 months before you
Wow.
plan on going over there because there's kind of it's a 6 month kind of pre-quarantine that has to happen. The dog doesn't have to like stay in the house or be in an actual quarantine. It's just that you have to have the rabies shots redone 6 months before, and then that paperwork has to be submitted, and then you have to wait a full 6 months to be able to take the dog in. But there's a lot of paperwork that has to be filled out in the interim too. So it's a
mm,
lot of back and forth with the airlines and the airports in Japan that's receiving the dog and the quarantine services there. So, but hopefully everything will go well. And as soon as I land, we'll be able to take her right out of quarantine and just straight to the house.
Nice. Nice. Um, Again, I can't imagine how busy you are. We talked at Nationals right after you had made the video to the public and all the opinions, I'm sure, about you going to Japan. And today we just really would like to talk about Japan with you. We
Cool.
figure everyone knows enough of your history, everyone knows enough about you and Eisei-en, and we are really looking forward to seeing what your future holds and what it can hold for so many people who want to see you again. Is that okay with you?
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Um, First question, really, start the conversation off more than just talking about your wonderful dog. Um, why Japan? Why did you decide to go back, or what made you want to go back?
There are a lot of factors for sure. I mean, and I say we, I mean, my wife and I, when we decided to move back to the States in 2017, um, we had kind of mixed feelings about coming back to the US at that particular time. We really wanted to stay in Japan if at all possible,
Mm-hmm.
but there were a lot of things that made it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for us to do that. So, I'm obviously not Japanese. My wife is Chinese. She's since become an American citizen in the last few years here, but at the time, it was impossible for us to get visas there and for us to become permanent residents there, which meant that it was impossible for us to take out a loan to start a business there. So from that perspective, monetarily, it was impossible to stay in Japan. Plus, I wanted to come back to the States to be able to, start a nursery here and say that I did something, from scratch, and that I built trees out here in the United States from scratch. Because if we had started a nursery in Japan at that time, I mean, you know how Japan is. You can go to any
Yeah.
nursery around the country, you can buy really high quality trees for relatively inexpensive prices, and you can fill up a nursery. And, it looks cool from the start, but I would always have in the back of my head this idea that, did I really did I really do this on my own? Could I have built
Mm,
these trees on my own from scratch? And I knew coming back to the States, I would have to do that. So, that was a huge reason for us coming back at that time. But I feel like in the last, 6 years or so since we've been back, that I've kind of proven that to myself and hopefully to the bonsai community as well, that
mm,
I can build things out, from raw material, and that I do have a certain level of skill when it comes to that. It's not just maintenance work. It's not just primping trees. It's actually creating art from raw material. So I've accomplished that aspect of it, and now the main reason for going back to Japan really is more family
mm.
reasons. Wanting to raise our daughter in Japan. Not that the United States is a bad place to raise kids. Obviously, it's a good place to do so. But just with our particular family dynamic, with my wife's relatives living in China, we wanted to be a little bit closer to them. And with the education system in Japan, the safety in Japan of living there, cost of living in Japan is significantly lower. And
Right.
it's just it's a very high trust society as well. So it's a very nice and convenient place to live. So all of these factors kind of combined are why we decided to move back.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thing about Japan and the education system alone. Knowing, like, I think I told you my wife is from Japan, and we've talked about that too. And I have a lot of respect for you taking that big move because that's not an easy feat to do, uprooting your whole life, especially after doing all of what you did at Eisei-en, building from the ground up, literally, and going over. That's a huge deal. But I respect it. Family is important, and you get to work on some high class trees too, for, like you said,
That's true.
for pennies on
Yeah,
the dollar.
I'm looking forward to that for sure. So I've already started purchasing a few trees over the last few months. I don't want to buy too many right now while we're still in the process of building the house. And we did purchase a piece of land this year, but that's just for the house. We're still searching for another piece of land for the nursery. So that's going to take, I would imagine, at least the rest of this year, if not the next couple of years, to find the right location. But in the interim, once we build our house on this property that we've already purchased, I'll be housing whatever bonsai I do purchase this year there until we can get the actual nursery built.
Nice. Yeah, and I know it's a convoluted effort, especially in Kyoto, where, they just passed that new ban for the foreign tourists and stuff. Can be
Yeah, I saw
a
that.
Can
sticky
What?
situation.
Yeah,
can you
over in
explain
in
more?
Gion. Mhm.
What's this band, Kevin? I haven't heard about this.
Or Bjorn, do you want to talk about it since you're gonna?
Sure, yeah. So there's a very famous area in Kyoto called Gion. It's one of the last remaining geisha districts in the city. I think there's three in the city. There's Gion, there's Pontocho, and then there's Kamishichiken. So we actually last year we bought a very, very small, like 400 square foot house right at the end of Kamishichiken. So that's where we're staying this year, and eventually we'll rent that out to students in the future. But in any case, the most famous of those three geisha areas is Gion. And it's always packed full of people. It's a beautiful area, but there are working geisha in that area and working maiko who are geisha in training in that area. And there's been a huge issue with tourists in recent years, kind of hunting down the maiko as they move from patron to patron, from business to business for their meetings throughout the day, and harassing them, like touching their hair, pulling their hairpins out, pulling on their kimonos. And it's all foreign tourists, obviously, that are doing this. So I think it was last week they made the announcement, and I think in early April it goes into effect this year. But there are certain streets in Gion that are going to be off limits to tourists. The main stretch will still be open to tourists, but the sort of side streets that are arguably, I think, more beautiful. There's sort of this quaint, like old Japan feeling to them, and very picturesque. Unfortunately, those are going to be closed off to the public.
Yeah, like little alleyways and things. And
Right.
what I was researching on it too was like, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago, I heard that they had made kind of a local city ordinance that said you can't take photos unless you have a permission or a permit. And 2020 happened, obviously, everyone knows that. And then I think from then it's kind of just been this in limbo kind of thing, as Japan is a wonderful place, but not always the most stringent for certain actions of creating oh, you did this, you're gonna have that, especially to foreign tourists.
Right. Yeah, I think they're going
And
to be much more strict with it now. There's a lot of
yeah,
people in the city of Kyoto are fed up with the tourists there.
yeah,
Like there's a lot of interviews right when COVID happened and the city shut down. I mean, the whole country shut down over there, but specifically in Kyoto, there were a lot of interviews that were done in the news and on YouTube, interviewing the local people, asking them what their thoughts were on the fact that there are no tourists now in Kyoto because of COVID. And almost without fail, everybody was like, Oh, it's so much better. It's so much better not having them here. We miss the money that it brings in, for the economy, but
Hmm.
it feels like, the Kyoto of my childhood. A lot of the older people would say that. So it's kind of interesting to see. What I think is interesting is that, I went to Japan for the first time in 2006 to 2007 as a foreign exchange student, and I actually went to university in Kyoto, Ritsumeikan University.
Hmm.
That's actually where I met my wife. But um, during that time, it's not that long ago, but during that time, Japan still hadn't become this massively popular place to go visit. The Chinese economy wasn't as good as it's become now, so there weren't that many Chinese there. The Koreans really weren't coming over. I would say you would see more maybe European and American tourists back then, but still, that was a pretty rare thing. So Kyoto didn't really have this, sort of touristy feel to it.
Hmm.
But just a few years later, after the economies in those countries started getting better and better, and you had these influx of tourists coming in, it got ridiculous after a while. So, um, when I tell people in Japan, like the native Japanese that were moving to Kyoto and building a nursery there, they're like, why would you want to move to such a touristy place? But the location where we're building the house and the nursery it's still in the city of Kyoto, but it's kind of in the outskirts in the northeast.
Okay.
So there's no like famous temples or gardens up there to draw
Hmm.
tourists up into that area.
Well, soon
So we're
enough,
kind
a
of
famous garden, right?
well, yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know how open to the public I'm necessarily going to be
Yeah,
because I don't know if you guys are aware of all the thefts that have gone on in Japan recently
Oh
it's
yeah.
bad. It's
with,
really
Yeah.
with
bad.
bonsai at the different nurseries. It's gotten so bad that just last week or the week before, the Japanese Bonsai Association on their website started putting up a registry of the nurseries that got robbed, when they got robbed, and pictures of whatever trees that they had photos of that got stolen are up on that registry now. So they know who's doing it. They know it's a group of
Yeah.
Vietnamese criminals, but there's a law in Japan that unless the cops are called and catch the criminals in the act, they cannot be arrested. Right, that's
Huh.
the only opportunity to arrest them. So a lot of these nurseries have now installed, security systems, camera systems, and hopefully they'll be able to, put a stop to it shortly here. But it's been difficult.
Yeah, they target a lot. I went to see Shinji Suzuki last year, or the year before sometime, and he's like, take as many pictures as you want, but do not post them anywhere.
Yep.
My
Mm.
museum is way too open and people can see. And I was like, wow, and I get it, fully understood and respect that. But I was like, man, it sucks it's come to that.
Yeah, it's a shame. Japan's such a high trust society. It's never been a problem, and now that they're, opening their doors to, overseas visitors and people moving to Japan from overseas as well because of the population crisis, the declining population there.
Hmm.
They need
Hmm.
more workers, so they're changing the laws to make them a little more relaxed to allow foreigners to come to work there. You're starting to see, unfortunately, spikes in crime and all sorts of societal issues. So I have a feeling it's going to get way worse before, or even if it gets better in the future.
Yeah, and I know this year is going to be a record number of visitors anywhere in
Hmm.
Japan, like in the
Right.
millions, they're said. And I'm like,
Hmm.
wow, that's crazy to think. You know, with all this talk of Kyoto and whatnot, how do you see your garden looking as an established thing when you get it? As you just stated, maybe not open to the public as much as it was here in the essence of like the generosity of allowing so many people in. How do you see it looking compared to the garden you had here? Not only on size, but stylistically, or, are you going to search for old Japanese Yamadori as opposed to what you had access here all the time? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it'll be kind of a twofold thing. So, in terms of, if we're talking about just the types of trees or kind of, what I'm looking for when it comes to the bonsai that are going to be at the garden, I would say that it's kind of a twofold thing here. So, one of my goals is to search out trees that have some sort of provenance or story to them in Japan. So trees that have been in the kokufu or trees that I worked on during my apprenticeship or that customers of Fujikawa-san, where I studied at his nursery in Osaka, customers own those trees and have me style them during my apprenticeship, or trees that have been in the sakufu or kicho bonsai, registered important bonsai masterpieces. Searching out those kind of trees, purchasing them, and actually keeping those almost as like a private collection kind of
Mm.
thing. Partly because those trees are incredible, but also partly as a preservation process,
Mm.
because so many of these trees are leaving Japan. They're going to China. They're going to, Taiwan and Korea, being purchased by customers there. So there's less and less of these good trees in Japan. So it's partly to sort of preserve that. And then the other aspect of it is I do want to still continue to build out trees from raw materials. So it is still possible to find raw material in Japan, raw Yamadori. You know, every time you go to the big shows like the Kokufu, the Taikon 10, there's always new junipers that seem to pop up at these places.
Hmm.
Even though technically it's probably illegal that they've been collected, but it's just kind of
Mm.
hush hush. Nobody really says anything about it.
Yeah.
There is a lot of private land that's owned too, way up north. So I have a feeling some of those trees are being collected legally, with permission from the private collectors. But
Mhm.
there are still those trees available in Japan. So my goal is to sort of search those out, and also build out new deciduous material, for example, like what I was doing here over the long term, because this, knock on wood, will be a permanent move for us to Japan.
Mm.
So I, knowing that, and knowing that this house that we're building is the house that we're going to remain in, forever, again, knock on wood. I had the ability now to really settle down and say, okay, I want to take this project on for like the next 30 or 40 years and really build it out. So that's a huge goal of mine as well. So yeah, it's kind of a twofold thing there with the material.
Nice. That's a lot of really good focus for new projects, honestly. And there's a lot of, I would say, not untapped territory, but different because your approach is going to be different than what you've done, right? Because I hate to assume, because you know what that means about you and me, but in relation to you've done your apprenticeship, you're now having this history you built with your garden in America. I mean, how do you see yourself as you as a person have changed, obviously, but how do you see that your bonsai has changed from coming back to the States and now going back to Japan? How do you think
Sure.
that influence will be comparatively to your
Yeah,
counterparts?
it's interesting. I look back on my apprenticeship in Japan, and look back on photos of trees and videos of trees that I styled during my apprenticeship. A lot of that material, or the way that I styled that material, when I look at it now, I kind of cringe
Mm.
at how it was done. And I say that because it was almost overwrought. It was very plasticky in a lot of ways. It looked, very fake. Nothing really naturalistic about it. And I think partly the reason that I styled trees that way was because I thought that that's what my oyakata wanted. Um, but now looking back on it, I think it was more of, uh, well, at the time, I thought it was exactly what he wanted, but looking back on it now, I think it was sort of my interpretation of what I had seen him do with other trees, and then I kind of over exaggerated that aspect of it. And now that sort of style has kind of become almost like synonymous with Kokain. So even the new apprentices who are there now are styling trees in that way that I styled them back then. And honestly, when I go back and look at Fujikawa-san's work from that same period, um, it doesn't look anything like what I was styling it as. It's not nearly as overdone. But because I did it that way, then my kohai did it that way, then his kohai did it that way, and now it's just sort of become synonymous with kokai. So when I came back to the States, I really took a step back from doing it that way, and tried to take a much more, um, I, I wouldn't say naturalistic approach, but certainly a softer approach
Yeah.
aesthetically with the trees. So when you say naturalistic, I think a lot of people think of, kind of wild forms, and
Mm. Hmm.
essentially taking a tree from nature, putting it in a pot, just kind of letting it do its thing. But it's also kind of used as an excuse, I think, for a lot of bonsai professionals just to be lazy and messy. So I don't necessarily mean that. What I mean is kind of refined but natural is, I guess, the way I
Mm.
would describe it. So, for example, like with pad creation on conifers, rather than creating, very, very flat bottom pads, completely parallel to the ground, I attempt to create a
Mm.
bit more lift with the pads.
Mm.
And each artist kind of has his subtle difference in Japan, but I would say I've become much more relaxed than what I was doing at Fujikawa-san's place, to the point where, I was there in December this last year, just a couple months ago, restyling the famous juniper there called Hakuryu, the white
Mm.
dragon.
Mhm.
And I styled it in the way that I now style trees. So it's, quite a bit more lift on the branches. Um, and Fujikawa-san and I had a back and forth there. It was a friendly banter back and forth, but he kept wanting me to drop the ends of the pads down to flatten them out, right? And I had them a little too high, so we found a happy medium and went halfway in between what he wanted and what I wanted. And everybody, I think, was happy. I have a feeling after I left, he probably went back through the tree and pushed all the branches down.
Like,
But at
my
least I
garden,
got
my rules.
that's right. At least I got photos and video of the tree in the form that I wanted. So I was happy with the
Yeah.
results. But there's a photo of me with that tree when I styled it. I think it was 2014 was the last time I really fully styled it. And that photo has become it's kind of been spread all over the internet, and the tree looks awful. It's overdone. It's like total plastic. It looks terrible. At the time I was super proud of it because it was like 70 hours of wire work to get the tree done.
Wow.
Like 7-10 hour days of wiring. So I was very proud of the work at the end. But this last time in restyling the tree, again, all the wire was off and I started essentially from scratch with rewiring it. It only took, I think, 2.5 days. And those days were short days. They were like, 5-6 hour days. So really like a quarter of the time this time to style the tree. But I've kind of figured out how to use less wire to get a similar effect that I was getting before. And also just, doing bonsai for so long, you just naturally get faster. It's like with anything, you just get better at it over time.
Unless there's more
So,
too, right?
What's that?
Said unless is more too, probably less wire used and more significant provenance.
Yeah, I think, that tree's been wired so many times over the decades that the branches were all kind of already in the right spot. So it is refinement wiring, but before it was like, okay, I got every little bitty branch needs wire on it so that I can put that in exactly the right position. And now it's like, okay, I figured out how to subtract the amount of wire to get a similar effect. And I think that's part of becoming a bonsai professional over time.
Nice.
So I see this a lot with other artists as well.
could you say a little bit more about like what type of tricks you might use to use less wire, especially as you're talking about with the fine branch placement?
Yeah, it's mainly identifying, which portion of the branch simply needs wire to either lift it or drop it into the desired position. So, for example, on a tree like that, we're working almost exclusively with the tertiary branches, and then some of the secondary branches need wiring, but all the primaries are in the right spot. So I'm actually quite often just working on the very ends of the branches to put them back into position. So when you're looking at like final bifurcations in the branches where they split, quite often one half of that branch will be in the right place and the other half will either be flopping or too high. So you just need to add wire to the one section of the branch to put that in the right position. So whereas before I would be so afraid that if I didn't put it on both in a few weeks, the other side would flop or it would start raising up. But I don't really care too much about that anymore. As long as the general profile is good, that sort of natural tendency of the branches to grow out and up is going to give you even more, I think, naturalistic lift to the branches as it grows out during the growing season. So the only problem with that approach is that you do need to get enough wire on the tree so that it doesn't fall apart design wise in a short amount of time. There are other professionals, notorious professionals in Japan, who will use almost no wire on the plants and they look cool, but like 2-3 weeks later it starts to sag and fall apart again, right? And it's done by those professionals. This may be the cynic in me saying this, but I think it's done by them to get those customers to continually bring those trees back more frequently so they can continually work on them and charge more money for the work on them. So like Fujikawa-san was all about sort of finding that happy balance, that happy medium, keeping the customer happy while also building a good quality tree.
Gotcha. Well, I'll have to pay close attention to that when we're wiring this summer.
Yeah, definitely. There's something to look out for. But I do always recommend to people learn the mechanics of wiring first, learn how to detail wire everything first, and then slowly learn how to subtract the amount of wire you need to get that similar result. 'Cause I do know a lot of people who have studied at nurseries in Japan who take that very minimalistic approach with wiring, and they never really learn the mechanics of it all to get things, set just right. They sort of come at it almost like putting the cart before the horse design wise, and then they can't really figure out how to get things done properly with the trees, at least in terms of designing them. So I always tell people, make sure you learn the basics, make sure you really learn how to detail wire, learn all the mechanics, and then from there you can start subtracting back.
That brings a question up for me as far as with your platform Bonsai-U, right? That's a wonderful platform, great videos. You have amazing editing skills, I will say. Like your cinematography is beautiful.
It is now anyway. If you go back to my old YouTube videos, they're terrible.
Still
So
enjoyable, I'll say.
people can see my evolution throughout the years. So
Just like your bonsai work, right? It's like,
that's
hey,
right.
all things in the um, as you stated in the video, but if you could expand on a little more, give us a little more insight, if you would. What is that going to look like comparatively to what it is now? Is it still going to be on that month-to-month basis, or is it going to change? Is it going to be a mix of like Japanese language with subtitles, or the list goes on of what it could be? What are you thinking at this time right now? Because that may change when you get there too, right? You know.
Right. Yeah. So in my head, the way I'm sort of planning things out is we're still going to continue the same schedule as we have now on the
Hmm.
platform, meaning that the first and third Wednesday of every month we'll have new demonstrations out, and then the second and fourth Wednesday of every month I'll be doing live Q&As with our memberships. I say memberships, our European membership, or our global membership, and then our American membership as well.
Hmm.
Um, but the demonstration videos are going to feature more other artists besides myself. So vast
Hmm.
majority of the videos that are on the platform now are of me teaching with a handful of other professionals from around the world, but it's going to shift much more towards going to other bonsai nurseries in Japan, filming demonstrations with them, techniques with them, things that I don't know much about, species that I don't typically work with, like flowering species, for example, a lot of deciduous material, working with like nursery stock material. How do you develop those things, rapidly? All of those kind of techniques and discussions. And because we're going to be in Japan, it's a lot easier for me to get to places like China and Southeast Asia.
Hmm.
So I'll be filming, hopefully in China several times. Like I said, my wife's family still lives over there, so we'll be going there quite often. We're planning on going to Thailand coming up here shortly, Korea, Vietnam as well. So I want to visit these different places to film Bonsai-U episodes with professionals that live there with their native species, which, in most countries around the world, you can find those same native species that are, considered exotic in the foreign countries, but that can be utilized for bonsai there. So I want to get a much broader, um, a broader range of styles, of cultural backgrounds, and of species to put on the platform.
Being that you'll go to China specifically, as you have family there, so I'm assuming it's a get there, two things good for you, see family and more bonsai and food, of course. But are you gonna do more focus when you do those kind of trips on like Penjing or something in that way, so people can actually get a real reflection of what it can look like, specifically from the
Yeah,
country of origin?
exactly. Yeah. So it's not just bonsai specific. I mean, technically, Penjing is just landscape
Right.
bonsai basically, and Pensai is just the Chinese version of bonsai. So diving more into like the cultural background of those things, why they look the way they do there, in addition to the techniques for actually building them. So there's one person in particular that I really want to go film with, and that is a fellow named Brook Zhao. I don't know if you guys
Mm.
are familiar with him. He wrote the book
Mm.
called Penjing Worlds of Wonder. I don't know
Oh.
if you ever saw that book. His Americanized name or Western name, he goes by Brook, but his Chinese name, I don't know how to pronounce it. I think it's Quinquan, I think.
Mm.
And then his last name is Zhao. So he and I were on the stage together at the 2017 World Bonsai Convention in Saitama in Japan. And my wife actually translated for his demo. He was building I think it was a Japanese white pine kind of forest planting on a slab for that. But he's a very, very nice person, does incredible work. And some of the most famous water and landscape penjing in China were built and are still maintained by him. So I got to figure out a way to get out to his place. But he, amongst many other people in China, I want to film with.
It's cool. That sounds fun. An amazing opportunity because there's so many unknowns with those cultural dynamics. Because I mean, I don't know, obviously, and I think most of us in the US understanding what bonsai may be with our understanding of American culture literally closed doors with China, right? So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It'll be interesting because I don't speak any Chinese, so my wife
Oh,
is going
okay.
to have to do the translations, and she's
Yeah.
not the most patient when it comes to me and foreign languages. So we'll see how that goes. But at some point, in the future, my daughter's first language really is Chinese because she's with my wife 24/7.
Right.
So at some point, I get my daughter to translate rather than my wife. And hopefully, she'll be a little more patient with me. But yeah, it'll be a fun experience, I think.
Would you say that you can hear more Chinese than you can speak it? and
I
understand that
can
way.
I can certainly understand significantly more than I could before my daughter was born.
Mm.
I don't really I know a few words in Chinese. If it has anything to do with like food, for example, I can understand most of that at this point. You mentioned the food in China being good. Like in China, food is life. Like everything
Mm.
just revolves around food.
Hmm.
And that's true in a household when you've got a Chinese wife. Like everything revolves around food. So I can understand quite a bit of that, but outside of that, I'm completely lost. So I struggle enough with Japanese as is. I'm actually going back to Japanese language school this year to try to get my skills back in check before we start the business up.
Is that worrisome for you that, the old adage, if you don't use it, you lose it, right? That goes with language pretty fast. Is it going to be different for you refocusing your language learning, or do you think you'll pick it up quick again just once you hear it?
Yeah, I think I'll be fine. Like the speaking and the listening in Japanese is no problem for me. I can
Mm.
communicate just fine. Um, Even having been away for that whole period during COVID, I was actually taking online lessons during that period just for
Mm.
safety's sake.
Mhm.
But even being away for that long and then going back to Japan for the first time in 2023, it only took like a week to feel kind of comfortable, like back to where I was before. But my biggest problem is the reading and writing. I
Mm. Mhm.
learned Japanese in university, and I at one point could read and write quite a lot of kanji, but that's something that it's very easy to forget. And the main reason, there's two reasons why I want to, go back to school and learn that. One is, we're going to have to write contracts and whatnot in the future with the business and, all those dealings and whatnot. So I want to make sure I'm not getting, fleeced in any way or making mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the second aspect of it is they've got a new point system in Japan now for becoming a permanent resident, which is essentially like getting a green card.
Mhm.
So in the past, I think you had to live in Japan consecutively for 7 to 9 years, maybe even up to 10 years, paying taxes consistently every year before you could apply for permanent residency.
Mhm.
Whereas now, because they've got a declining population, they've now turned it into a point system where if you found a business, if your business makes a certain amount of revenue per year, if you have a certain level of degree, like if you've got a master's, you get this many points. If you've got a PhD, you get this many points. And then it adds up. And I think once you hit 70 points, you can then apply for permanent residency, no matter how long you've been in Japan. So I already have 60 of those 70 points. And if I can pass the Japanese language proficiency test level 2, which is the second highest level, then we can get those final 10 points and we can apply for permanent residency. Right. So I
Mhm.
don't have to worry about every year, every 3 years reapplying for a new visa to live there.
Nice.
It's just a lot safer to have that.
So if you pass for the permanent residency, does that go to your whole family as well? Because they
Yep, it
are with
extends
you?
to the whole family. Yeah, because
That's
they're
great. That's
dependents.
great.
Yeah, so it
Yeah.
extends to everybody. Yeah, and
Awesome.
we're not ever going to change our citizenship to Japanese.
Mm.
It took a long time for my wife to become a U.S. citizen, and being a U.S. citizen is important to both of us. So, and to my daughter as well. So, we're not going to change that. But in terms of just ease of living and not having the worry of, oh, every couple of years I got to reapply for a visa. What if they don't give it to me? Oh no,
Right.
like that's all gone once you get permanent residency there. As long as you don't do something, illegal or stupid in the meantime.
Do you still get the perks of being within Japanese healthcare and things in that way as a permanent resident? Like your daughter get free healthcare until she's like 18 or whatever, as most kids do in Japan?
Yeah, so we get that now, even without permanent residency, because I'm currently there on a business manager visa. It's called KA Kandi visa.
Mm.
Uh, so this was part of a special program that was recently put together by the federal government in Japan, but it's sponsored locally by specific cities. So Kyoto has this program called the Kyoto Startup Visa Program, and it's mainly designed to get foreign companies with huge amounts of potential revenue, like tech companies or architecture firms, like things like that, to move from overseas and relocate in Kyoto. So I applied for it a couple years back, just thinking that maybe this might work. That's kind of unique and different, even though revenue wise we're nowhere close, and we'll never be anywhere close to what those tech
Yeah.
companies could offer in terms of tax revenue for the city of Kyoto. But I was one of the only people to apply for it who actually spoke Japanese, and my story
Mm.
was interesting enough for them to sort of take it on. And it ended up working out really well, and I ended up being able to get that visa. So the way it works is they give you a 6-month visa to start with, and
Mm.
during that first 6 months, you have to found the business, get an office, get a residency, like a place to live, set up bank accounts. Like everything's got to be set up. The problem is, unless you already have connections in Japan, it's almost impossible to do those things. And the Kyoto Startup Visa program isn't going to help you with that. They're just, your go-between with your visa and the government, basically. So luckily we had a lot of connections from before, so it actually made it easy. Like I'll tell you one of the weirdest things is in the city of Kyoto, if you want to rent an apartment, rent a house, or even buy a house, you already have to have residency in Japan and have what's called a Jumihyo, which is a
Wow.
residency paper, right?
Mm.
Well, if you're just moving there, how do you have a Jumihyo? Like, how does that? You can't do that. That doesn't make any sense, right? So we have a very old friend in Kyoto, an older lady. She's kind of like our adopted Japanese grandma. So she agreed to allow us to register as living with her and be on her Juminhyo so that then we could get residency for ourselves in the city by, like I mentioned before, buying this very small house on the northwest side of the city last year. But we had to have that to be able to even purchase this house. So it's kind of an odd situation. So I asked the Kyoto Startup Visa program, how many people actually made it through that first 6 months and got everything done. And they're like, only a few percentage points were able to do it because it's so complicated and difficult. But we actually managed to get everything done within the first 4 weeks of getting
Wow.
there last year. So then we reapplied for an extension on the visa. We've got a year visa. And then this summer, because this will have been the first year that we paid taxes in Japan, hopefully they'll give us a 3-year visa this time, which gives us a little bit more time to get everything together for the permanent residency application. And we can get that taken care of within the next couple of years.
I know friends that have taught in like the JET program or have gone over and worked in some kind of avenue of Japanese business salary person. Uh, they found they had to pay taxes to the States as well. Do you have to do that this time around being a permanent resident ongoing?
Well, so the accountant that I have in Japan, he is one who was recommended to me by the Kyoto Startup Visa program. And his office is literally right next door to the city office in Kyoto, the city government office. So he's all
Nice.
tied in with the government people. He's very expensive, but I figured for the first few years, I'd rather not have any mistakes made on my
Hmm.
part about all of this. So he's given me advice on how to handle all of this. So as long as we're reporting all of the money to either one country or another, you don't necessarily have to pay taxes in both. So
Oh,
um,
good.
yeah. So if I make any money in the United States, as long as I'm reporting all of that to the Japanese government, he takes care of putting all that tax information together for me there, and I pay all the taxes to the Japanese government. So that may be a function of basically what he said is if you own a business and you've started the business yourself, and it's either an LLC or a corporation, then as long as you're reporting all of that money in Japan and paying all of your taxes there, you don't have to report it back to the United States. I'm going to confirm that on the
Yeah,
back
I was
end
gonna
with
say.
the taxes coming up here.
Mhm.
So it's very interesting in Japan too. Like your fiscal year is based on the founding date of your company. It's not like here where everything has to be paid on April 15th. It's based on the founding date of your company, right?
Mhm.
So the tax accountants have to keep track of all of that information for you as well. So it becomes a
Wow.
lot more complicated. Yeah, I think it's probably not necessarily a bad thing though, because there's not this massive rush, to get your stuff in before April 15th. It's so the tax accountants can kind of spread it out throughout the year depending on which company they're working with,
Mhm.
right? But yeah, it's very, very different than the United States.
Since moving to Japan and with all this info of culture dynamic, taxes and whatnot, do you feel like you're almost having to start your professional career over, or it's just a different chapter?
No, I think it's a different chapter. You know, the the focus of the nursery will be very similar to what it was here. So mostly education based. Like I'm not planning on doing, what's called bonsai bye-bye in Japanese. It's like buying and selling of trees. That's
Mm.
not really something that interests me that much. And because I'm not going to do that, and I'm focusing on, the international crowd for educational purposes, both with Bonsai-U and with having people at our nursery eventually to do long-term study programs, I'm not competing with the Japanese directly, which I think a lot of them were kind of worried about when they heard that I was coming back to Japan. But anytime that I've seen any of the other professionals over the last few months, I make sure to mention that in the conversation.
Mm.
I kind of work that in that, oh, by the way, this is my bonsai or my business focus with the nursery here. And you can see like the worry on their faces kind of disappear a little bit.
Yeah.
So I have no desire to compete with them in that. And that was another concern in 2017 when we moved back was if I started a business there and I was going to compete with them, they would make my life very, very complicated. Well, some of them would make it very, very complicated
Yeah.
for me to be able to do that.
There's so much politics involved too, with all that, and
There is,
no,
yeah,
no need to get into that deep, but
yeah,
good choice.
yeah. There are still a few people a few professionals in Japan who I don't know if I'd say they're skeptical or they just don't want to see me succeed, but
Hmm.
I'm dealing with one in particular right now with some back and forth. I don't want to mention any names, but
Yeah, yeah,
they're making my time in setting up my business in Kyoto a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. So it's unfortunate, but I don't think it's going to be much of a problem.
it's interesting because in that, from me as an outsider, having visited Japan and seen specific bonsai areas, not being a professional in any light as you are, having someone being that way towards you coming in as still a foreigner, right? Not of Japan, but you studied there. That's a very interesting avenue that person's still going about where they feel I don't want to say threaten or put words in your mouth, but that idea that they feel competition with you because it's
Right.
completely different, right? So that has to be a weird feeling for you. I
Yeah,
don't
it's
want to say,
weird. Yeah, I mean the individual that I'm dealing with right now, I was warned by my oyakata and
Mm,
some other people to be careful
mm,
of this individual. So, and I had that feeling beforehand, but it was nice to sort of hear that from my oyakata. Just be careful. Sort of
mm.
had that in the back of my head when dealing with this individual, and of course, it has come to it's starting to come to fruition. But it's nothing. It's not a big deal. It's just a
Yeah,
bit of an annoyance.
for sure. Bring
Mm.
some nice tea and say, here's a care package.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to dwell on it, but what do you think they're worried about? Like, because as what I've heard coming out of Japan is that a lot of their expensive trees are getting sold off to China. So it's not like their market is shrinking. So there's plenty of buyers, it's what it seems like.
Yeah, I don't think it's so much a worry that I'm going to steal their business or anything. I think it's more of a posturing than
Mm.
anything. It's Japan is a very hierarchical society, so um, like obviously within organizations, for example, the bosses are viewed as almost godlike within the company, and the lower you are in the totem pole, the more sort of under the boot you are of the person above you. And that's seen throughout society, and of course in the bonsai world as well. There's a hierarchy amongst the nurseries, and this one particular nursery is a pretty big, or this professional is a pretty big player in the bonsai world. And I think it's someone who's set up in the area where I am as well, in a different capacity, not as an actual nursery there, but with something else in Kyoto. And I think he just wants to make sure that I know that he's the boss in the area,
Mm.
kind of
Mm.
thing.
Then my turf, like playing by the rules.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Like you need to it's to a point where I was contacted by this individual and told how I need to edit my videos when I'm
Mm.
branding
Wow.
in the city of Kyoto. And I was like, that's not happening, dude. Sorry, man. Like that's not gonna happen.
That's interesting.
So yeah, this is very I don't know. It's a bit of an irritation, but I'm sure it will subside here. So
Yeah.
It'll be
Well, hopefully,
interesting. Go ahead, Ryan.
I was just gonna say, hopefully they'll be more willing to collaborate on your videos and teaching on your platform since they aren't gonna see you as competition directly.
that's what I was hoping too, because I had promoted this particular individual in this particular location multiple times on YouTube, for tens of thousands of people to see. But I yeah, it's unfortunate. So we'll see how
Mm.
it plays out. So, but I think
Yeah.
it's all just posturing at the moment.
Mm. Going back to what you're talking about, signing contracts and things with teaching and whatnot. I've heard of people here in the States having to sign NDAs to study with certain people, or people studying with them had to sign NDAs because they were, bigwigs and whatnot. How do you see your teaching components either being the same or different to your students either coming to Japan, or do you expect Japanese people to come study with you? Or I don't want to say expect, but do you hope that some people may come to study with you?
I think it would be very cool to have some Japanese people come study with me. I'd actually thought about launching a separate YouTube channel, a bonsai channel with bonsai content, but doing it all in Japanese, like just speaking Japanese, so that I can
That'd be
get
cool.
some
Yeah.
of that customer base there. But the main focus, like I said before, is going to be international students,
Mm,
educating them. So not only with Bonsai-U, but with our what I'm going to call the like here in Nashville. We called it the intensive program, but in Kyoto, we're going to rebrand it as the immersive program, the
mm,
immersive bonsai program, where you can come for like a week to 8 weeks potentially, and stay at the nursery or stay nearby the nursery and then and study with me during the week. And we'll take on only like one to maybe three students max at a time. So it'll be, much more sort of intimate than it is here in Nashville, where we usually take on like, five, six, sometimes seven students at a time. Um, but it'll be, much more sort of long-term orientated. And the way it'll work too is, I want students to feel like they're getting to add to the story of some of those, trees that already have a lot of provenance to them. So they'll get to work on those kokofu trees and the sakufu trees. But also, I want to set it up in a way where students can send me a request as to what they want to learn about,
mm,
and we can hopefully set it up in a way where I can take them to like a professional auction while they're here, and they'll be
mm.
able to like pick out the tree that they want to work on. I'll of course purchase it at the auction. We'll work on it through the program, and then we can resell it at the auction the next go around. So the actual, buying and selling of the tree isn't necessarily to make money, but it's more, for the experience, the cultural experience of the students when they come in. So I'm hoping to be able to set that up as well.
That would be really unique.
Yeah, I think it'd be fun. I mean, the only issue is, going to the professional auctions as a non-professional. Sometimes that rubs the other professionals the
Mm,
wrong way. So I have to be kind of careful in how we do that. So I have to see, how that gets set up. But I've got to join all the necessary organizations first as a professional, like the Japanese Bonsai Association, the local, what's called Kumiai, which is kind of a more localized organization in the Kansai area, to be able to be invited to those auctions to begin with.
mm. No, is it going to be more of that seasonal class approach where they have that reoccurring class they go to every time like you had here, or is it going to be one class individualized, like you pay for each class you come to?
It'll
How's it
probably
structure
be,
based?
yeah, I mean, the times throughout the year where we can really do certain types of work are somewhat limited. So it'll be somewhat of a similar schedule to what we had here at Eisei-en in Nashville, meaning like, February, March, we'll be doing work. We usually take April off because we let things grow. Then May, June, we do work. Then July and August, when it's too hot, we close down. And then September through end of November, we'll run classes as well. But it's not going to be necessarily, I'm not going to do like a lecture series like what we did here in Nashville. It's going to be much more like just hands-on, come in, sit down, work on the trees, almost like a little mini apprenticeship each time people
Nice.
come. And people will be able to choose what time of year they want to come to focus on, specific techniques like, repotting in the spring, or approach grafting in the summer, or, heavy bending on pines in September, say, for example. So they'll be able to choose, which time of year they want to come to learn certain things.
Nice. Do you see yourself taking on apprentices going forward, as in that structured system in Japan's already there? People already have that identity with it. I know you had some or had singular person. I don't remember how many you had here, but do you see yourself going back to that model of some kind someday, maybe?
Yeah, in Japan, probably not, because the nursery is going to be quite small over there. My nursery here in Nashville, the property that we own is a 10-acre property, but the nursery itself is probably an acre and a half. I would say maybe as much as 2 acres, probably about an acre and a half though.
Hmm.
So I really needed an apprentice here to help with that material. So I did have one apprentice here for a couple of years. He ended up quitting partway through for somewhat
Understood.
unknown reasons. He just up and disappeared, but that's another story.
Life, right?
Um, life, yeah. But in Japan, the size of the nursery max will be about an eighth of an acre, so
Oh,
significantly
wow.
smaller.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, the thing is, like in the city of Kyoto, if you want to buy land, like we were looking for like a quarter of an acre that we could build the house and the nursery on, right? They give
Hmm.
us an eighth for the house and an eighth for the nursery. But to buy a piece of land that big in Kyoto in the city limits is going to cost you anywhere from $1.5 million to $2 million just for land with nothing on it.
Is that
It's
US
in
dollars or
that's US
yen?
dollars.
Oh my.
Mhm.
It's
Yep.
insane.
No,
Insane. So
start
if you buy
donating blood right
something,
away.
yeah, if you buy something smaller, like half that size, like an eighth of an acre, that's still very, very large.
Hmm.
But the price drops precipitously from something that's larger, like a quarter of an acre, right? So that's why we've decided to buy two separate pieces of land, and the
Hmm.
land for the nursery will be a little bit more out, kind of up towards the mountains, so it'll be even cheaper to buy it up there. But an eighth of an acre for me is plenty. Like the goal is to have, probably 70, 80 of these high quality trees with provenance to them. And then, a few dozen trees that kind of cycle through the nursery for students to work on or long-term projects. So it's not going to be a massive nursery.
Mm, nice. Let's say, I think Kelly had a question for you. Oh,
Kelly just froze a bit.
Sorry, yeah,
mm.
my internet's not great. Um, Bjorn, do you find it interesting to learn about the politics in Japan? Like, is it challenging? Is it fun?
Like the politics of bonsai.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's having lived there for so long in the past with 6 years as an apprentice and then an additional 3 years after that working over there, you kind of inevitably figure out, who fits in where in the hierarchy in Japan and how everything kind of works together. Um, and for the most part, as long as you adhere to that and you show deference to the people who need to, have that shown to them, and you're polite, and everything usually runs pretty smoothly. But that being said, again, back then that was as an apprentice and as kind of just a stylist at Fujikawa-san's nursery, not really competing. But now that I'm competing, there's a little bit of a different kind of atmosphere when talking to the other professionals, which is, why I'm trying to allay their fears as much as possible by telling them what my business model is.
Mm.
But I think one of the more surprising things, maybe it's not that surprising, but for people from overseas, when they hear about things like the kokofu, for example, is that show is, at least the awards for that show, are entirely political. Because every tree
Mm.
that goes in that show, or at least the vast majority of them, are incredibly high quality trees, and any one of them could win the Kokofu Award. So how do the judges choose which trees actually win the award? So it's all politics behind the scenes that goes on, usually starting months, if not almost a solid year before uh, the next Kokofu, with the professionals who are maintaining these trees going around to the judges' homes and putting in a good word about this specific tree that might be coming up at the next Kokofu. It's never
Mm.
said, "Oh, can you give this tree an award?" Everything in Japan is always implied, right?
Yeah.
So these professionals will go to the different judges' nurseries or homes, meet with them, maybe show a picture of the tree and say, "Oh, my client is considering putting this in next year. He's a big client of mine. Just keep an eye out for this tree at the show next year, right?" And then, as long as that goes smoothly, there's no money exchange, so it's not a monetary thing. But um, when the tree comes up for judging the next year, that tree inevitably wins. So that's why from year to year, there's a different number of Kokofu awards at each show. It's not every year like, there's three in the first half, three in the second half. Sometimes it's five in the first half and zero in the second half, or one in the first half and two in the second half.
Mm.
But it all has to do with the politicking behind the scenes.
If you feel so inclined, please.
Right.
No, uh, is Ikuza still involved with bonsai? I know historically it has been, here and there. I know if there are other people I've talked to in
Yeah.
Japan, they said, yeah, some, not so much.
I mean, at Fujikawa-san's place, we never had any dealings with the Yakuza with the bonsai.
Mm.
We did have some dealings with them in December when we would build what are called shochikubai, which is the New Year's planting, where you put like a pine, flowering apricot, and bamboo all together in a single planting. We used to make like 4,500 of those every December. So the whole nursery gets shut down, and we basically set up this assembly line and build these things out. And some of the biggest customers were local Yakuza who would come in, buy them, and then take them back to their local neighborhoods and sell them for exorbitant prices to the businesses there. Basically, with the suggestion that if they don't pay for these, that the Yakuza can't offer protection for their business, meaning we're going to come in and just bash up your business if you don't buy this
Mm.
for an exorbitant price from us. But a few years back, the government, the government probably always knew about it, but they got or they put a new law into effect that basically put the kibosh on that. So after that, we actually stopped doing the shochikubai, partly because Fujikawa-san hated doing it and his dad had kind of retired from that, but partly because a huge portion of the business was lost due to that law changing. But when it comes to bonsai specifically, at Fujikawa-san's place, we never dealt with the Yakuza, at least not from my knowledge.
Yeah.
I do know that other nurseries in the past have dealt with the Yakuza. Um, you know, um, I don't want to say too much, but
Yeah. No, you're good.
yeah,
Yeah.
other nurseries have certainly dealt with them. I don't know in modern times in what capacity they're dealing with them, because a lot of that has now kind of gone way under the radar. It's much more like
Yeah.
white collar crime kind of thing
Mm-hmm.
than necessarily like neighborhood bash ups and stuff.
Yeah. Plus the government stepping in so heavy now too. A lot of
Oh
the
yeah,
Yakuza have disbanded or, as you stated, become white collar internet scams and things in that way,
right.
which is
Yeah,
still blows my mind in Japan. But
there's
speaking of
bad people everywhere.
yeah,
Mhm.
sadly. Speaking of Kokufu, do you hope, or even Taikon 10 or any other shows, Gafu 10, or local shows, given the like public use buildings and things? I know like Tochigi has a show every winter that they do. I met Mr. Fujikawa there from up in Nasu area.
Okay.
And wondering for you, do you hope or do you have any plans to submit trees to those shows as like specifically, Attack on 10, my understanding is a significant show. Kokufu is a significant show. If you had planned to do any, do you have a favorite one also?
Yeah, so I certainly want to get trees into the kokufu. The only issue with the kokufu is that it's considered an entirely amateur show. So all of the trees that go in that show have to be owned by non-professionals. So
Hmm.
me as a working professional, I couldn't put the tree in under my own name. So it would have to be sold to a customer first, or a customer would have to bring a tree to me to style and put in the show. It would also require that I join the Japanese Bonsai Association, which I will do at some point, but there's some politics involved with that. So I've got to navigate that to begin with as well. But yes, I certainly want to do that. The Taikon 10 is much easier to get trees into. There's no prejudging for that. And I think you really only have to be involved with like the local Kansai Kumiai or some Kumiai, some organization to be able to put trees into that show. The Sakufu, which is the creator show, which is
Mhm.
it's an all professional show. That's something I definitely want to try to put trees into in the future. That's one of my long-term goals is to find some raw material in Japan and build it out for however long it takes. If it takes 10, 20 years, it doesn't matter, but build it out to a degree where I can put that into the Sakufu, and maybe even to the level of competing for something in that show. Which again, that's a lot of politics as well. I'm not a very political person, so
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if I want to go that route, but just to be able to build something from scratch and then put it in that show, that's another long-term goal of mine.
Stay Switzerland.
Bjorn,
Yeah.
Bjorn, can an American client enter a tree into Kokufu?
Yeah, absolutely. So as long as they're going through a professional nursery, they absolutely can. I don't know if you guys are, I'm sure you're familiar with Doug Paul from the Kennett Collection
Mhm.
up in Pennsylvania. He almost every year will put a tree into the kokufu, and then he has the ability to then import that tree legally to the United States and keep it in quarantine here at his quarantine facility. The biggest problem for other Americans who want to do that is getting the tree to the United States after it's in the show is going to be nearly impossible. Um, because of the risk of having to bare root those trees, they have to sit in quarantine for 2 to 3 years. The quarantine facilities that are in the United States, like Doug's and like Brussels Bonsai Nursery, for example, will not take individuals' trees as part of their shipment because of the high risk of, if there happens to be, let's say, a pest on your tree for some reason, or a disease on your tree, and it's coming in with, let's say, a $500,000 shipment of other trees, they either burn that entire shipment or they send the entire thing back to Japan. So it's a massive risk for them as businesses to do that. So it's understandable that they don't want to take on individual trees. So as long as the American client is okay with the idea of, let's say, buying a tree, building it out at my nursery, we put it in the show and then sell it into the Japanese market afterwards, that's okay. But if the goal is to get it back to the United States, that's going to be a significantly more difficult, if not impossible, thing to do. But on the flip side, with Europeans, we'll be able to do that and actually legally export it to Europe very easily. So I have a feeling there'll be a lot more Europeans going that route with me than Americans.
It's all bare rooted too, right?
To Europe, it doesn't have to be bare rooted. It can stay in its pot in the soil, but to the United States, everything has to be fully bare rooted. I was actually up at the U.S. National Bonsai and Penjing Collection last week, and they invited a guy out from he's working with the USDA, trying to figure out how to change the laws for importation into the United States to allow some species to come in with soil. Even if they have to go into quarantine afterwards, that's okay, as long as they can come in with soil. That would be a huge boon, I think.
Yeah.
So they're working on that. And the reason they're working on it is because in 2 years from now, the U.S. National Arboretum Bonsai Collection will be 50 years old. So they want to import, I think, 5 new trees from Japan, and they're trying to make the process easier to get those trees here. So if anybody has pull with the government, they do. So hopefully things will work out, and maybe in the future it'll be easier to bring stuff in from Japan.
Yeah, I'm in school right now for horticulture at the Ohio State University, and that's been a big topic I brought up in a lot of classes because a lot of people who are my peers are agronomy, agriculture, farm kids, which is good. We need farms, love your farmers, hug your farmers, But the thing that I think, as a country don't really know specifically is the import-export facilitations or non-facilitated aspects within getting those things from other countries. Because we've seen the downfall of laxed laws that happened, emerald ash borer, other non-native invasive things coming. Do you see that as a good thing going forward if it's laxed in some way?
So I think the biggest problem with, the way the laws were to how they became, to what they are right now, is that it was such a massive swing from being too relaxed
Yeah.
to being overly strict. And when it becomes overly strict, then this whole sub-market pops up of people shipping trees in illegally in boxes from Japan, right? With no treatment, no checks, no nothing. And there's an even higher risk of those trees having something wrong with them and bringing those diseases or pests into the country than if they had just done something like, maybe like a happy medium, where instead of bare rooting, they come in with the soil, but they still go into quarantine for 2 to 3 years. That's reasonable, right? Or they do get bare rooted, but they're only in quarantine for like a year, for example, like some sort of happy medium there. But because they swung so far in the other direction to being too strict, I think it sort of sort of created this black market of trees that are getting shipped in just in boxes, and people are taking the risk doing that, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Does the
Ryan.
tree-
I was gonna
Oh,
say
sorry.
Ryan just became a nursery owner, or my co-host here, and we've talked about that in detail. I'm like, Ryan, would you ever import if you could? And I never got an answer. Ryan, would you do that if you could?
Well, I'm mostly focused on our native Yamadori and seeds and all these things. So I suppose if I ever got to the point where I could have a quarantine greenhouse, then maybe I could investigate it. I'm studying microbiology, so I'm kind of interested in maybe having a quarantine greenhouse just to do some experiments with our diseases that affect trees. But that's like way in the future. I don't have the resources for that right now. But yeah.
Sure. Hopefully, in the meantime, they'll relax things a little bit. It sounds hopeful with this fellow from the USDA that I talked to last week, but they've got to convince APHIS that that's something that is workable. So we'll see. But so many of the rules are so arbitrary when it comes to importation from Japan. So one of the craziest ones to me is that Japanese black pines were actually banned for a long time.
Wow.
Bringing them, and they might still be banned or at least very difficult to bring in. And the argument was that there was some sort of issue with the roots. I don't know if it was like a nematode issue or what the problem was,
Mhm.
but you can still import Japanese white pines that are grafted on Japanese black pine trunks with Japanese black
Huh.
pine roots, right? But
Caveat.
because they're a Japanese white pine, the USDA just views them as a Japanese white pine, right? But they still got the same problems in the root system. So it's a whole bunch of arbitrary crap,
Huh.
sort of,
Mhm.
typical government bureaucracy making rules just to, have something to justify your job for the next year. Kind
Mhm.
of thing. And then, there's no real logic behind what's been put into law, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I
Right.
was
Go
just gonna
ahead.
say, working in the lab, like we have the same kind of fights with our lab safety people. They make a lot of arbitrary rules, and then we have inspections annually, and we make sure that we follow the rules really closely around that time, and then the rest of the time we kind of do what we want. But don't
Right.
tell them I said that. Yeah. Mhm.
You think they listen to the bonsai podcast? I don't
Probably not.
know.
I think I'm safe.
What makes you comfortable immersing yourself in different cultures? Like, for instance, you're moving to Japan and then you're planning on visiting different countries and learning about them and their bonsai. Like, what makes you comfortable doing that?
That's a good question. I think people are quite surprised when I say this, but I am an incredibly introverted person. Like I like to keep to myself, be quiet. Like I need that time to sort of regenerate my energy, just being alone. Um, and I think living in Japan is the perfect place for an introverted person. Even
Mm.
though I stand out when I walk around on the streets, you don't nowadays there's so many foreigners that you don't like really get looked at or anything. Nobody's really coming up to you and bothering you. Um, but I do certainly stand out there. But as a foreigner there, and even as like a Japanese person, being an introvert and living in Japan, it's so easy to do because everybody sort of just keeps to their own personal bubble. They usually leave you alone. They're not necessarily going to engage you in conversation. I really like that aspect of it. If you're an extroverted person, and I've known a lot of extroverts who have moved to Japan for like study abroad programs in university and absolutely hated the experience, right? Because they felt like they couldn't be themselves there. So for me, it's perfect. But in terms of like going to other countries, to film or to interact and do bonsai with those people, um, the last 3 years that I was in Japan, I started traveling a lot to get my name out there and to, start making money, to be able to save money to start a nursery at some point. And that required traveling to foreign countries quite a lot. So I was on the road like 250 days a year, every single year for those 3 years, plus the first couple of years that we were back in the States as well. And I just got kind of used to that aspect of, going to these places. And it's not just a job when I go there because I typically would stay with the people who are hosting me rather than staying in a hotel. So I get to interact with their families, like eat their local food, like hang out with them. So it was much more of like cultural experience than just traveling for work. So I got very comfortable with that aspect of it. Plus, it's just fascinating to get to go to these different places and see everybody's unique take on bonsai, like how they make bonsai, how they think about bonsai, use of their native species, how they view Japan. Like it's just interesting to talk to people about those things.
Is there anything in particular that you worry about when you're traveling to a new place, even now after you've had all that experience traveling so far?
Not so much. Yeah, nothing really bad has ever happened, knock on wood, on any of
Mm.
those trips. I did have a less than positive experience on one trip to India, but that was just kind of uh, a result of so many different factors kind of coming about all at once. And it was part of a big convention that was going on. So all of the other professionals who were there also had a pretty poor experience in that instance. So I think that was more of just a one-off thing than an Indian cultural related thing. But
Mm.
yeah, I really don't have too many worries because when I go to these places, the people that I'm working with are usually people who are either friends via like mutual acquaintances, for example, or there are other professionals who have invited me who I'm already aware of. And their goal is to make my experience as fun for me as it is for me to make, their learning experience as fun as possible for them.
Well, that's good. And I guess being with people that are local there, they will tell you, oh, avoid these areas or like give you all the local tips. So
Oh yeah. Anytime we would go out in those foreign countries, that they're always there with me. I never go out by
Mm.
myself. So
Okay.
yeah, that would make me a little nervous for sure in some places.
You ever like look back and just be amazed at where your journey's taken you?
It's certainly surreal in a lot of ways, I would say. Um, Especially now being able to go back to Japan, because this was always a goal of ours, was at some point to get back over there. Initially, it was like, okay, we'll do it in retirement. And then we just kind of kept moving up the timeline, especially once our daughter was born. So this feels like the most surreal aspect so far of my life, like getting to move back to Japan and more specifically to Kyoto, which I think is the most beautiful city in the world. It's my favorite city
Mm.
anywhere in the world, and actually getting to build our dream house there in a dream location. Like it's just that aspect of it feels very, very surreal.
Question I ask a lot of people who are dads, as I'm a dad, my daughter's almost 2. I Is your daughter around the same age or
Yeah,
a
it
little
should be
older?
three in about 3 weeks.
Man, time flies, right? Like I
Yeah.
can't
Oh
believe it.
yeah.
It's like, wow. Um, how do you find your balance of work, life, and want to be present as a dad? Like, especially with the move going to Japan, do you think you'll have more free time than you did here in the States?
Most definitely. Like this year in particular, aside from Bonsai-U, which we're going to continue to do, I'm essentially taking the rest of this year off.
Awesome.
Not really going to travel hardly at all for teaching. I'll do a small teaching tour in California later this year. We've got a couple of conventions, but aside from that, it's just going to be focused on, uh, adjusting to Japan, getting my daughter adjusted to Japan. And then once we do build the nursery and get things going, here in the States, because we're in Nashville and most of my customers are within, let's say, like a 4 to 6 hour drive, they can easily drive here anytime that they want. So it was essentially 7 days a week. And it's been like that since I was 22, when I started my apprenticeship. So like the last 16 years now, I've been 7 days a week, 365 days a year, sun up to sundown, bonsai all the time. But now that we're going to be in Japan, it's a little more isolated, obviously. So I can kind of control the scheduling when people actually come to the
Mm.
garden a little more easily. People can't just show up necessarily. So the goal is to sort of shift over and become a little bit more of a normal person, kind of operating Monday through Friday, 9 to 5,
Yeah.
having weekends off, being able to do things with my family. So that'll be the most exciting part. Like right now, I've been away from my daughter since February 15th.
Oof, that's
Right, we're
rough.
filming this
Yeah,
March 26th. So I'm going back
yeah,
to Japan next week. So it's just one more week
good.
until I'm back there. But it's like 6, almost 7 weeks, I think, 7 weeks total apart. So like this is the last time we have to do this. Thank goodness.
Yeah,
So, but
no,
it
I
was
yeah,
necessary. It
yeah, I
was
understand
necessary.
that. Last summer, my wife and daughter were in Japan for 4 or 5 months, or 3 to 4 months. It was a long time,
That's a
And then
long
I
time to
was
be
like,
apart, man.
man, and we got married there and all that, but I had to come back and work, like you said, and you just end up working like a dog more than anything because you're just like
Oh yeah.
get my mind off of it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because people from who are non-professional that are like extreme hobbyists or lifestyle, if you will, of bonsai life become dads and they ask me in my local scene here in Columbus, and in Portland, where I'm originally from in Oregon, uh, how do you maintain your time? I'm like, well, this last week was spring break for school, so every night I was going to bed at about 5, 6 in the morning, just repotting my butt off because
Uh,
I didn't want to waste a day, spend it not with my family. So it's
right.
like you value your time for what you want to do. If you want to do bonsai, you do it in the wee hours of the night.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I'm viewing this almost as like a semi-retirement compared to
Oh,
what I've been
uh-huh.
doing for the last, 16 years or so. So it'll still be a lot of work, but it's gonna be different in a good way.
Yeah, it's because it changes your life overnight, and your experience in your relation to what you want to do for yourself and your family. And do you think that's affected you how you style your bonsai? Like, do you see it different, like how your daughter interacts with your trees and stuff? Do you see
Yeah.
yourself interacting different?
Not necessarily so much with the trees. I don't know if it didn't seem to change me and my personality that much when my daughter was born.
Mm.
But I noticed a massive difference in my wife. It was
Yeah,
incredible. Like the motherly instincts, the way they kick in is just it's
overdrive.
so cool to see. Yeah, it's like a complete 180 almost in terms of personality. So it was very, very cool to see that. And she's obviously kept that up the entire time. So even
Definitely.
when my daughter is a little bit of a turd, shall we say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm right in stage too, where it's every
Yeah.
day. No, yeah, yeah, that she
Exactly.
speaks Japanese, so it's like, yeah, 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 all the shows.
Yeah.
Um, with you, you know, I know like certain people in Japan who apprenticed come back and open a nursery, and some people will not live at their nursery, or they chose to do it first. And then, like Michael Hagedorn, for instance, he told me, and I quote him, I got a tiny home because I didn't want to be on site, and now I have a place for my apprentices to live, you know. Do you think this new experience of not being directly on site will give you more peace of mind to not have to be 24/7 on? I mean, you're going to think about it regardless, but you're not
Yeah, I
walking out your
think
door and seeing your trees, you know?
yeah, having a separation will be good. There are some inconveniences with that, obviously, because even on the weekends, I'll still have to go to the nursery and water the
Yeah.
trees. So we're
Mhm.
gonna make sure that the garden is within a 10-minute drive from the house. That's our stipulation. That's why it's probably gonna take a little while to find the perfect property for the garden.
Mm.
But on the flip side, there would be more concern with protecting the trees from being stolen.
Mm,
Right. So we're going to have to figure out how to, what kind of fence we're allowed to build. There's a lot of regulations for fence height in Japan with all the earthquakes that go on there,
yeah.
right? So we're going to have to figure out how to do that. Security systems. We are taking the German Shepherd with us, so she'll be kind of a guard dog at the nursery.
Yeah, yeah.
So that will help a little bit. Although she's a terrible guard dog, she just is
Belly
a
pads and
big a
everything, huh?
big sweetie. Yeah, but she looks scary. She looks like she'll eat your face off.
Hey, Bjorn, what's the best way to utilize Bonsai-U?
So, with Bonsai-U, there's I think a good mix of everything from beginner level material on there all the way through very advanced techniques. So, when somebody joins Bonsai-U, the library that we have in there now has well over 300 videos.
Nice.
And as a member, you can go back through and watch any of those videos anytime you want. They're all always available to the membership. And it's set up in a way where when you go into the library, you can either type in keywords for what you want to learn about, or there are filters in there where you can click a button to say, learn about Hinoki cypress specifically. Or if you want to learn about what to do with trees in the spring, you can click on that filter, and it'll pull up all the videos with that related topic to it. We also do on there a lot of follow-ups. So it's not just like a one-off styling of the tree and you never see it again. I'll do multiple follow-ups on the same tree throughout each individual season so that people can see, what's being done in each season so that they can then apply that to their own material. And I do that. We've been doing Bonsai-U for a number of years now. So we've got a lot of trees that were put up initially years ago, and then I've done follow-ups on them recently. You can see just how much they've transformed in a short period of time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's
I
very cool.
know.
And then we,
Yeah.
we do the live Q&As as well. So people can then ask follow-up questions about either the video that was released the week before or any other topic that's on their minds at that particular time of the week or time of the month.
It'll be interesting to see the new approach you have with the trees accessible to you in Japan when you get fully settled in and everything, comparatively to what you had as far as the American experience with the trees and unknown species. Question I wanted to ask specifically with that: will you miss those obscurities of those unknown native species, or those unknown new species you've never worked with, comparatively to maybe they're still exploring in Japan, but not as much as you can in the States
Yeah.
geographically, you know?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think there were some species that I just recently, I wouldn't say discovered, but had brought to my nursery or had purchased from other places that were new to me, and that we don't really have a lot of information on in terms of the techniques that are applicable to those, just in the last year, actually. So I hadn't really ever worked with lodgepole pines. I hadn't really worked with pitch pines or yellow pines, for example. These are all plants that I'm sad not to be able to continue to work with because the techniques are very similar in a lot of ways with certain plants in Japan. There's a lot of analogs there, but
Hmm.
there's some nuanced differences in terms of timing and how they react to those techniques that I'll miss not being able to sort of add to that knowledge in the States. So I'll still try from afar as best I can, but it's different when you don't have the material in hand.
Because what did you show at the national show? I chatted with you about it. It was one of the pines that you were just playing with.
Yeah, that was a
Um,
a yellow pine,
okay.
or a short leaf pine, Pinus echinata. And that tree, when I showed it last September, it had only been collected a year and a half before that. So it went from the mountains to the national show in a year and a half. And that was because we were able to decandle it 2 times in one growing season, and expedite the ramification development on the tree very, very quickly. So that's one that, yeah, I'm sad not to be able to continue to work with. But it went to a good home down in Atlanta, which is a good climate for it. So I have a feeling that the person who purchased it is going to really develop it out nicely, and we'll be able to add to that information on that species.
I was going to say, what is the range on that as far as where it's found?
So it's that particular tree was collected in Missouri.
Okay.
I don't know how far north they stretch, but I think they thrive a bit more in warmer temperatures. So Missouri, Arkansas, probably in Tennessee. I would imagine probably over into the Smokies, but I'm not 100% sure.
Understood. Okay. Um, One more question I have for you. I know we've already chatted about an hour, so we appreciate your time. You know, you're a busy guy. Um, with people going to visit your nursery in Japan in future, how does that look like? How do they get a hold of you? Like, I guess it's more a personal question for me because I'll be visiting more often. Like, hey, Bjorn, how's it going? If possible, not to invite myself. I'll bring wonderful fruit as a gift. But how does that look? You know, what do people do to get a hold of you? Is it the same email you, reply back, that back and forth, or something different?
Yeah, so the website will stay the same. It's either Eisei-en.com or bjornbjorholm.com or Bonsai-U.com. It all redirects to the same site, but you'll be able to contact me through the contact form that's on there, which is via email, and then we can set up a time. Once we actually get the nursery built, what I'll probably do is have a calendar on the website where you can choose the date and time that you want to come. That way we don't have to go through the back and forth with the email, and you can just pick the time you want to come and just show up at that time. So more than likely we'll set it up that way.
You ever see yourself downloading a Line app sticker thing just for your bonsai stuff?
I haven't thought about that. I do have Line, but I haven't thought about that for the business side of it. So it's something to look into.
I know Toyota, when we rented a car, real quick, little side note. We rented a car. We traveled all the way around Japan this last summer, like I said, when I was there for that little bit. And Toyota had me sign up for their line, so I still get random Japanese Toyota line advertisements or sticker packages and things. It's little incentives.
Good. So something to think about, especially if I start doing the Japanese language YouTube channel. So we'll see.
Right.
Yeah.
Bjorn, thank you so much, man. We appreciate it, and thank you for giving us your time and your undivided attention and allowing us to pry into your life.
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure talking to you guys. It's always fun to talk Japan and bonsai.
Definitely. Until next time, we'll see you then. The Bonsai Time podcast is purely grown and horticulturally crafted by Kevin Ferris, Ryan Houston, and Kelly Louie. To find out more and see pictures about today's interview or sponsors, see the show notes linked in the description. Submit questions, suggestions, or tree pictures for future discussion episodes. Find the contact form on our website, bonsaitimepodcast.com, or message us directly at bonsaitimepodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to support future episodes, please rate us, share episodes, donate, or become a sponsor. The music on today's episode was provided by MIDI Cancer. To find more of their work, check out their SoundCloud and Bandcamp pages. To stay in touch with us, subscribe to the Bonsai Time podcast on your favorite podcast app, Instagram, or YouTube, and Facebook. Contact us individually. Kevin's Instagram is Kevin_Ferris PNW. Kelly's Instagram is Bonsai with Kelly. Ryan's website is invivobonsai.com, and his Instagram is invivobonsai. Thank you all, and remember, bonsai on!